All right, so let's start with the updates that are coming in from Russia, where the number of coronavirus infections has crossed the grim figure of over 300,000. Russia now stands behind only the United States in the number of infections that have been recorded. The death toll, however, due to COVID-19, and this is where it's pretty surprising, is 3,099. And this comes just after Russia had claimed that the coronavirus situation is stabilizing, since there were more patients getting discharged from hospitals than new cases of infections being detected. And to get us more updates in terms of what the situation is like in Russia, we're joined in by our correspondent Lucy Taylor, who's joining us live from Moscow. Now, good morning to you, Lucy. Give us an update in terms of what is happening in Russia right now. The grim figure of 300,000 infections has been breached.
Yes, it's more than 300,000 infections. It's more than 3,000 deaths. But it does seem as though the epidemic may be starting to stabilise. Those numbers were above 10,000 new cases every day across the country for several weeks. For the last few days, it's been lower than 10,000, lower than 9,000 over the last couple of days as well. So lower numbers of new infections coming in, even though Russia says it's doing very widespread testing. The Prime Minister said that it does appear that the numbers are gradually stabilising, particularly in Moscow, which has been the city hardest hit. About half of all infections so far have been in Moscow. Moscow's mayor also echoed that, said that there were still 18,000 people seriously ill in hospital, but that figure was lower than expected. He said that the city had avoided a worst-case scenario of a peak in mid-May that overwhelmed hospitals. He said that hospitals were coping. He did, though, have a warning that mortality would rise in May because all those people who were admitted to hospital during the height of the infection and at the end of April have now spent weeks in hospital. He said we will start to see more people dying in May from the infection, but on the other side, hopefully fewer new cases, hopefully the outbreak beginning to stabilise, the numbers beginning to level off here in Moscow and across the country.
Right, that's an important development, that the figures, although they've crossed the 300,000 mark, that the numbers could begin to slowly stabilise. But Moscow's mayor also had another important point that he made, that he said that anywhere from one person out of a population of 50 could be infected with COVID-19. That's a large number of infections just within the city of Moscow.
Yes, Moscow's mayor all along has had that warning that there could be many more infections than the official figures are recognising, even though he says there is a lot of testing. They've started a new programme of antibody testing, selecting tens of thousands of people at random to be called in to have that test to see if they've had or have the infection. But it still is the case, of course, that many people could have this virus and be walking around on the streets to pass it on to other people without knowing it. And he's given this warning particularly in regards to the lockdown. Moscow has been in lockdown since the end of March. It is still possible to go out, but only for a limited number of activities. But over the last week or so, we've seen more people coming out onto the streets. He said that 1 million more people were on the transport network this week than earlier in the outbreak in April. So many more people out on the streets. And he told them, be careful. Wait a bit longer, wait a week or two longer before we have any more restrictions. Many people have been pushing for outdoor walks and outdoor exercise to be allowed, but he said it's too early for that. He wouldn't consider allowing that until the number of new cases each day was in the tens or hundreds. And at the moment in Moscow, it's still in the thousands.
Absolutely. And also, Lucy, just before I let you go, what has been the economic impact of the COVID-19 and all of these lockdowns that have been put in place?
Yeah, very significant economic impact in Moscow and across the country. And that's partly why the government, the president, are beginning to talk about easing lockdown restrictions. The Prime Minister said that 27 regions of Russia were now able to start to ease restrictions, allow people to go back to work. He said that 14 regions had already done that and 13 would be doing so shortly. It doesn't seem to be the case in Moscow, though. Construction industry workers have been allowed to go back to work here, but most other people told to work from home or not work at all, even though the end of the formal national non-working period is over. There has been some criticism of the government not supplementing people's incomes to compensate for the loss of takings, the loss of wages, and some businesses here pushing for a bigger package to help them. But it seems as though the government's strategy is more to try to get people back to work where possible, rather than dip into the national funds to help them further.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed, Lucy Taylor, for joining us and getting us all those insights from Moscow in Russia.